Unfortunately, those within and outside the Cinderal Confederation were only able to enjoy peace for a frustratingly short time. To be fair, the humans were already starting to get a bit itchy with nothing to do on Earth, as well as around the other planets within the Confederation. When the Mandarin expansion came hurtling into Confederation space, it hit hard and with a fury. 3 agricultural worlds ran by the now fairly wealthy Nimiki were sacked within days of the Mandarin making contact. The Nimiki, however, were not just conquered. No, that would have been far too simple, far too fair, far too normal. The Mandarins sacrificed every Nimiki they got their hands on, slicing them from chest to groin and then opening them up to a readily deployed statue of their god. The Mandarin were elven-looking, much like the Point, except that they were over 6 feet tall, dark of skin tone, and had eyes as red as freshly spilled human blood. Despite this, they had fur-tufted tails much like the Nimiki, something they had apparently taken personally after finding the race on their newly acquired planets. Their god was one of their own, though he had 6 arms, and the statues usually showed the palms open so the Mandarin could fill them with the organs, bones, heads, and limbs of their victims. This butchery caused the entire Cinderal Confederation to recoil in horror, as even their past enemies, the Daramir, had more honor in how they fought than this. The mass flight of the Confederation caused the Mandarin to believe they were the new bullies on the block and reveled in this new power as they raided merchant posts and the space lanes filled with traders. They, of course, never knew the humans were on their way, sporting murder wood that could have cut down an earthen pine tree. Humans loved fighting against vicious foes such as this, as it meant they didn't have to wear their Be Nice gloves. To the Mandarin, they believed all the humans had died during the Daramir War, purely for the fact their religious leaders had said so. While the humans were in fact on their way, it was slow going still, which meant that the other members of the Confederation had to try and hold the line until their own butcherers arrived. The Mandarin found nearly all of the Confederation wanting in terms of prowess, and only the formidable Karlaken gave them pause. According to enemy intel, the Mandarin frankly thought the members of the Cinderal Confederation were a joke, as nearly 50 million human warriors from all regions of Earth, known as a war wave, skipped through space towards their new front of battle. Earth was left with another 3 war waves in reserve. These reserve war waves were comprised of mostly new recruits who were unblooded, new recruits, such as Frerin the Yorpal. The Mandarin held some kind of arcane teleportation technology that even baffled the Opticans, allowing them to fold into space and then exit out into another region in record time. While the current way was to skip along through space in very controlled bursts of near light speed, it was slow going as the engines needed to cool after so many skips. The Mandarin simply folded into space, then came out of it where they wanted to be. Bizarre and terrifying, this ability was only held in check by the fact that the Mandarin couldn't do in its strength, only allowing a couple thousand of their kind to do so in order to raid and take their sacrifices as they wished. Optican Yorpal and Point Space fell prey to such actions, but the Mandarin were not ready for what appeared to meet them in human space. These raiders would be the first to meet the might of humans, as well as a few helpful hands. The alarm was loud, far louder than Frerin had remembered it being. The sound was designed by humans to jerk them out of a dead sleep, and was so spine-crawling that it put Frerin in immediate fight or flight. "What is it?" Frerin screamed, rolling off her bunk and coming down onto her paws with a plait of pad on tile. Zetran came barreling down the hallway, his tail wrapped around his waist to avoid tripping anyone around him. "Raiders!" Raiders? Here? Himmel asked, already pulling on his boots despite the fact he was still in his underwear. They unfolded right beside Quadra. First Sergeant Mormon called out, already in uniform and placing his dark yellow honor beret on his head. We're dropping in immediately. Farron's hackles raised as she heard the name, and she spun around to face a human. Quadra? That's where the Nimiki refugees are. I am aware, First Sergeant Mormon said calmly, the flash on his beret marking him as a veteran drop trooper of multiple combat actions. The entire 3rd Company is dropping in. You will all test your iron, and your steel will taste blood for the first time. Himmel, jerking his pants over his boots, looked up in awe at the human. We're combat dropping? For real this time? No more training drops, First Sergeant Mormon said, turning and addressing the barracks room. You will all be dropping into an active combat zone under fire. The planetary security forces are attempting to hold out long enough for us to arrive, but they are reserves from the Karlaken and Yorpal. They are already falling back as much as they can. Get your souls in order. Today, you earn the right to wear human assault armor. Pitiful, the smarmy voice of Venderlin mused, cleaning the blood of multiple races from his glick blade. They had been hunting the local security forces for days now, and none of them were proving to be any particular fun. Vastet looked over to the male mandarin, arcing an elegant eyebrow, as her tail lashed behind her. What is pitiful, Venderlin? Your father bought you the best glick blade the armors could ever make. Venderlin sighed theatrically and flicked his hands free of blood, looking around at the dead patrol they had just butchered. It feels like overkill at this point. These Karlaken are a fair bit of fun, but the Yorpal fall apart at even a single strike. I mean, honestly, deflector generators of all things. It's simply childish. They do their best. At least they fight, unlike those heretical Nimiki. Vastet spat. It is diabolical that they even share the same kind of tale as us. Venderlin shrugged. We will eradicate them from the stars soon enough. Then those nasty Poit will follow suit. Who do they think they are, sharing the same kind of ears as us? Blade Leader? Came a voice from over Venderlin's comm channel, and he pressed his elegant finger to the inner earpiece. Yes? We have ships coming into range. They are finalizing their last few skips, the voice said. Venderlin sighed out, looking over to Vastet with his arms open and face smug. More sacrifices are arriving, Vastet. It appears we may have to miss dinner. Pity, Vastet said, hefting up a spiking rifle and checking the harmonized crystal charges that functioned as its ammunition. We were having stew tonight. This is Blade Leader Venderlin Rem to all units. Venderlin purred out, the throat mic within his armor perfectly picking up his sultry tones. More meat is arriving for our blades to savor. Pull away from the main assault line and arrange yourselves around the drop coordinates. We have work to do. Farron's stomach was filling with butterflies as she double-checked the ammunition pouches that adorned her suit belt, as well as the extra magazines she had on her thigh armor. The human veterans had these, and she was copying the loadout, as well as the other recruits. There had been time to arrange her armor over the short few days they were in space, and she wasn't sure if she wanted more days or less. They were to be led personally by First Sergeant Mormon, as well as a slew of other humans who were veterans of the Daramir War. Their faces were grim and serious, but they held themselves as if they were just going into the office to clock in for the day. The heavy assault troopers of 3rd Company were arranged in the drop bay of the Big Mouth Bass, a human-inspired space dreadnought that had an odd split down the middle that led to the hangar bays. Ahead of Farron were their assault pods, massive armored machines that carried an entire 50-man platoon, and it even had room for 2 vehicles in the middle. At the moment, the massive slab-sided pods were being loaded with ammunition belts that fed the main cannon that deployed out of the top, laying down suppressive fire as the infantry disembarked down the ramps. Called the Higgins Mark III, these assault pods were launched from the ship with teeth-rattling speed, piloted by a Navy PRCP, or Planetary Reentry Combat Pilot. These assault pods deployed multiple drag arrays when the PRCP had enough atmosphere to do so, slowing them down as they came towards their target. When they were close enough to the ground, the pilot would engage the final landing engines, the huge square thrusters allowing the pilot to quickly decelerate the craft and even spin it around should the need arise. Despite being a ship, they were called pods because they were only designed to land and were shuttled by another craft up to the dreadnought when the assault was done. Freren had been assigned to 4th Platoon and was a bundle of nerves since she had no idea where Himmel and Zetran was. This platoon was mostly humans and Yorpal, and much to her annoyance, all the female Yorpal in the platoon were looking to her for guidance. First Sergeant Mormon took in a deep breath as someone spoke to him from behind, a Navy shipman judging by his uniform, and Mormon nodded his head. He pulled his helmet over his beret, something that Freren found odd, then activated the comm thrower his particular kind of helmet had. His voice boomed over the noise of the bay. "Helmets on!" Freren slipped on her Yorpal helmet with practiced ease, her ears going right where they needed to be. Her helmet hummed to life around her head, displaying its armor rigidity, as well as counting all her magazines, sidearm explosives, and even her combat knife. This helmet was very new, and even had her name etched onto the side of it. Her comlink came to life in her ear, hissing as the plugs came down close to the inside of her tall, fox-like ears. "Mount your ship!" First Sergeant Mormon called out, and the entirety of 3rd Company stepped forward at the same time, marching up the loading ramp. "The call of battle echoes to us, and we march to meet it!" It was taken as it came with the loading racks arranged inside the pods, and Freren sunk back onto hers, the pinions and clasps sinking into the sockets on her armor. She felt her brand-new combat shoes lift off of the ground as the loading rack hoisted her upwards a few inches, engaging its shock absorbers with a gentle hiss. Her nerves were buzzing with adrenaline as First Sergeant Mormon's voice called out over the net again, other racks around her hissing. "We face an enemy that offers neither mercy nor empathy." First Sergeant Mormon growled into his mic, and Freren could hear the disgust in his voice. "They have come to kill in the name of their god, cutting down civilians with no regard to morality. They have broken the warrior's covenant, so they have no rights to its regard. No prisoners, no quarter. We will scrub them off the face of this planet, then wash them from the stars until not even their screams of agony survive." First Sergeant Mormon's words made her heart hammer in her chest as she felt the line go dead, and even her ears were trembling from the war fever and anxiety. This was a new thing that the Yorpals were having to deal with. The humans had a way about battle that awoke something within them, something that made the blood of the Yorpal jitter and vibrate with manic energy. Freren caught herself baring her fangs again and giving her head a soft shake, taking in a deep breath to steady herself. "Specialist Freren." Freren opened her eyes with a few blinks, looking to the left of her helmet display. This was another odd bit of training that took a while, having to get used to looking at something very close to her face along the internal display. She had inquired about why the helmets had a T-shaped visor, as well as a standoff distance from the visor to the eyes. Apparently, it was a good median range between all races in terms of them being able to see words, and could even be adjusted. "Specialist Freren." The gruff voice came again, and Freren blinked at the name at the top right of her visor. "Yes, Sergeant Smith." "You're leading a Yorpal squad. I'm putting them on your display." Freren tried to control her breathing as 12 names appeared on her display, along with their ranks. Beside the names were the letters RFA, letting her know they were not dead and ready for action. "Arun Freren." A voice called out into her ear, and she knew it was a blue male named Terran. "We have to be out the ramp first." "What are you talking about, Private?" Freren asked him, her head locked in place within the rack. A female voice spoke next, a little huskier than normal, which told Frerin it was semantic.
Arun, we are by the left ramp. All of us are.
Frerin blinked at her display, going through the options until it pulled up a small map of the assaulted pod. Her circle, as well as her squads, were all beside the left drop ramp.
I see. We have to be the first.
Terran shouted again, his excitement plain as day in his voice.
We would be the first Yorpal ever to leave a human assault pod on a field of combat alongside other humans. We will make history.
Frerin chewed over the thought for a few moments, then blinked at her comm selection until she pulled Sergeant Smith back into view.
Sergeant Smith? Yes.
4th Squad requests the honor of being first out the door, Frerin said professionally, her heart finally calming in her chest.
Granted.
Sergeant Smith said without delay, and the line shut off as he spread the word to the other NCOs. Frerin saw another name light up on her helmet display, and another human male voice entered her ears.
3rd Squad will be right behind you. Clear the ramp, and we'll be with you as we go into hell.
Thank you, Sergeant Mackey, Frerin said, and she had to fight not to wag her tail. She liked Mackey as far as humans went, and he treated all the Yorpal with actual respect.
Don't thank me yet,
Sergeant Mackey said with a laugh.
You'll be the first to get shot at, you know.
May as well pull off the Band-Aid, Frerin said into her mic and smiled as Mackey's laughter was her answer. An override voice entered every helmet, including Frerin's, and the dockmaster spoke to them all at once.
All Higgins loaded and personnel accounted for. No personnel found in the drop bay. Drop bay venting for launch.
The dockmaster purged the drop bay, sucking in all the oxygen they could before letting in the vacuum of space. Inside the drop pods, all the overhead lights changed to match the time of day and light levels on the surface, and as morning was coming, it bathed the racks in red and orange light.
Unlocking drop pods for launch,
the docking master said coolly, and all of the pods swung out into space on their long platforms, dangling along the bottom of the drop bay like heavily armored bats.
Showing green from all percepts, engaging launching cables.
The Higgins Mark IIIs all gave a shudder as the launching hooks came under pressure, tightening and coiling with enough power to launch the pods at over 300 miles per hour in just 5 seconds.
Her first real ride,
Frerin said with a grin, then looked across the loading gangway at a large human man. He nodded to her, then gave her a nod wave with his hand, extending his thumb and pinky while keeping his 3 middle fingers tucked. They were only able to do this because their XC-1 Lancer rifles were attached to their chests. Frerin extended her fingers as best as she could and gave him a waggle back.
Hell yeah, furry,
the man said into her comlink.
Let's get that ass.
Frerin snorted out in laughter, but choked it down when the dockmaster spoke up again.
All pods ready? Go for air boss.
Go for air boss? Frerin asked out into her helmet, then hissed in a breath as her stomach gave a lurch. The assault pods of 3rd Company were all launched at once, screaming along the rails of their launch ramps as fighters screeched out of their own hangar bays as escorts. Frerin's teeth were gritted as the assault pod came to speed, then let out a sharp exhale as they left the rails, spearing through the void towards the planet below.
All pods launched in the green. Brace for thunder and take their souls,
the dockmaster said, and the green lights beside the heads of every trooper within the racks turned amber. Frerin had thought it would take longer, but the shaking rumble of the assault pod hitting atmosphere jerked her back to reality. The comlink was worryingly quiet as Frerin looked around as best she could to the humans around her. All of their eyes were closed. None of them were speaking either, and appeared to be calm despite the chaos around them.
Arun?
Came Semantic's voice into Frerin's ear.
The humans are, I don't know, their lips are moving, and the one ahead of me is holding some little silver cross thing.
Frerin narrowed her eyes, trying to see the human dead ahead of her that had given her the odd wave and was doing her best to read his lips. He appeared to be holding some odd little necklace in his fingers, which to her looked like some kind of anchor. No, it was a weird-looking little thing. Was it a hammer? Then her eyes caught a single word she kind of knew, one she had heard murmured among some of the humans when they would go off into the woods on little religious meetings.
Tear. No, that's not it. It's tear.
Freren said quietly to herself, watching the human's lips move.
He's speaking to Tyr, one of the human gods of war.
Freren squeezed her eyes shut as the drag devices deployed, catching the atmosphere and making the assault pod shudder even harder than before. All of the racks were rattling now, hissing and compensating to keep their cargo safe. The Yorpal did not have gods, of course. They were people of science and did not believe what they could not explain or hold within their hand. They did not even believe in souls until they came into contact with the point and were expressing a lot of cultural self-doubt when the Karlaken and humans also believed in such things. As she plummeted down to the surface of Quadra, she opened her eyes, looking out towards the human as he tucked his amulet back into his armor. Perhaps. Maybe.
Tyr, watch over me and my people.
Freren said quietly, her words nothing but a hush that could only be heard by her and maybe, just maybe, the human god of war.
Find me worthy.
The assault pod shook with resolute resonations as the thrusters boomed to power, decelerating so swiftly that Freren felt the G's pull at her fur and skin. All the racks gave a great tss as the assault pod hit the ground, reducing the impact down to just a hard jolt for those within their grasps, then clacked open. Freren's shoed paws hit the deck, and she spun around as soon as she could, ripping her rifle off her chest as she pounded down the gangway towards the dropping ramp.
Find us worthy,
Freren hissed, baring her fangs from under her helmet as the other Yorpal gave out their war howls, forming up the run behind Freren. Venderlin gave a short laugh. Oh no, the poor fools. They've sent more Yorpal. They are now wearing new armor, Vastet said, her voice uneasy as she crouched down behind the rest of the warriors. The Mandarin were all staged around the outskirts of the ruined town, crouching down behind abandoned vehicles or huddling behind the broken stone of walls. It won't matter, Venderlin said, his voice rife with contempt as he brought up his rifle and readied a vibrant orange crystal shot within his aiming reticle. They break like poorly made pottery, and all they have done is given us more offering to Eos. The orange streak made an audible shriek as it sailed through the air, and Freren had a horrifying moment where she could actually track it and watch as it sailed towards her. To her shock and surprise, the munition collided with her chestplate and shattered, spraying orange particles through the air in ringing streaks. She jerked back a little with the weight of the projectile, but her helmet advised her that her armor was still at 100% survivability. Her blood boiled within her veins as she looked up to where she saw the round come from and pointed a bladed hand on the run as she called out into her comlink.
Rip their fucking souls from their bodies!
Venderlin's arrogant grin faltered as he watched the round shatter off of the Yorpal's armor, then twitched backwards as she pointed her hand at him, the T-visor of her helmet glittering with morning sunlight. That is surprising, Venderlin said quietly, turning to look at Vastet. Vastet, however, was staring wide-eyed at the massive armored figures running down the ramps behind the Yorpal, bearing the same kind of armor. Venderlin, how close to the human planet are we? Does it matter? Venderlin asked, reloading his weapon. How far? Vastet screamed, grabbing the Mandarin by his hair. Venderlin let out a howl of pain, snarling as he slapped her hand away. How am I supposed to know? The War Spear told us to come to this planet to eradicate the Nimiki there. That is all I know. You Eos damned fool! May he strike you with all his hands! Vastet screeched. They have brought the desolation of the Daramir with them! The mad butcherers of the stars! Venderlin looked horrified, his eyes wide. That's impossible. They all died in the Daramir War. The Holy-Handed told us so. They have doomed us all, you pithweed! Vastet screamed, cutting her hand toward the troopers spilling out from the assault pods that were deploying their cannons. Cut them down! Hurry! Call in for an exfil!
before they can fully deploy!
Sergeant Mackey's XC-1 Lancer was barking out in rapid bursts of leaden death as he fired on the move, calling out into his comm leak with his helmet as multiple munitions either shattered or embedded themselves within his chest plate.
Solid munitions are failing to penetrate. Machine guns deploy and pin them. Frerin, take your squad with 6 and flank that defilade.
Frerin nodded and loomed out around a broken food cart, her Yorpal and a squad of humans following her. One Yorpal gave a yelp of pain as orange crystal embedded in her thigh, causing her to crash down onto the pavement and skid to a halt.
Medic en route, continue mission.
A voice murmured into her ear, and Frerin turned her head in time to see a massive human hurtle over a wall, his black skin exposed as he already had to rip off his gloves.
Copy!
Frerin shouted, then brought her rifle to her eye as dozens of Mandarin infantry came running around a debris-littered corner in the road.
Contact!
Frerin and her infantry depressed triggers and let fly a barrage of lead, causing 3 Mandarin to jerk back harshly and dive for cover. Others skittered to a stop, halting behind broken sidewalk stalls and benches.
Split and flank!
Frerin ordered, pointing her bladed hand to a firing position in front of them, and then off to the side. The humans took off at a sprint on their flanking maneuver, while the Yorpal took up the task of laying down fire, walking brazenly in the open while hammering the Mandarin positions. The Mandarins did their best to fire back, their weapons designed to break through nearly every armor they could think of meeting in space. But they had failed to work in the simple plate armor the humans wore.
Their armor is tough,
A Yorpal said through her squad comlink.
Must be a polymer hybrid for it to allow them to move like that.
One Mandarin pulled the cord on a plasma grenade and threw it towards the Yorpal, but Frerin's helmet picked up on the weapon as soon as it was thrown, displaying an alert and highlighting it within an amber square. Frerin lunged forward, snatching it out of the air while twisting her core, then hucked it away from her infantry and into an empty area of the road. How? A Mandarin veteran bellowed, ducking down behind a shattered vehicle that was now leaking both coolant and fuel. Frerin picked up her pace, now squeezing off single shots as she advanced on the cornered Mandarins.
Cease fire!
Frerin said calmly as she waved her hand from side to side, watching as the humans immediately engaged in melee, their bayonets fixed at the end of their rifles. The screams and shrieks of the Mandarins filled Frerin's ears as her squad of Yorpal came around the corner to enjoy the show, Frerin's helmet showing her that all the other squads were shattering the Mandarin infantry line like a bar of steel through glass. Yorpal troopers rested their rifles on their shoulders as they watched the humans sight through the Mandarin swordsmen, the blades having difficulty even causing slices through the thick armor.
Those are anti-shielding blades,
Terran said, wincing inside his helmet as a large male human gripped a Mandarin by her hair, her head lacking a helmet due to their own pride.
They cut through like any kind of projector you can think of, just ignores them outright.
The human didn't even bother using his bayonet, instead muscling the woman's head to the side with a crisp crack of her neck. Her howls of pain snapped off as if someone had flicked a switch and she fell to the ground in a heap.
Rad,
Terran muttered, watching a female human pin a male Mandarin to a car door with her bayonet.
enemy flanking movement.
Symantec called out, swinging around her own XC-1 MG. The light machine gun let out a chattering report as she laid down fire on a squad of riflemen that were trying to reinforce their already dead fellows. Many of them tripped over their own feet and face-planted into the asphalt, the payload from the XC-1 MG munitions ripping flesh away from their bodies with minuscule detonations. Frerin and the other Yorpal responded in kind, fanning out in an echelon formation as they steadily walked across the debris-littered road. The humans formed up behind them, shooting over their smaller infantry brethren and ripping the Mandarins to shreds before they could even react to the enemy fire. Frerin's helmet gave a light amber pulse, showing that she only had 3 rounds left in her magazine, so she performed a tactical reload with practiced ease. As she thought about it, ramming her magazine home and placing the partially empty one in her dump pouch, she felt rather calm despite the bloodshed. Calmer than she thought she would have been, actually.
Specialist Frerin, move your squad towards Point Echo.
A voice called into her ear, and she knew it was Sergeant Mackey's.
We are pinned down by heavy weapons. Flank them. Copy.
Frerin said, then waved a hand at those behind her.
Let's move it! Point Echo!
On her helmet, A thin blue diamond appeared near the top of the visor. Next to it, the English numbers marking how many meters she was away. She always found it funny how touchy the humans were about measurements, as the American she was with liked to use feet and pounds, and there was an apparent war between Europeans and Americans on which was better. According to the Americans, they only used meters to get the Europeans to stop whining, then switch to feet, yards, and pounds when they are back home. She looked forward to working with the Europeans eventually, even though the stories about the Greater Scottish were rather frightening. "We're getting slaughtered down there." Venderlin howled into his throat mic, personally manning the splitter array. "They have humans here." "Yes, of course, they're real humans, you idiot! Get those ships down here now! Now!" The splitter array was the only thing seeming to slow the humans down, the weapon energizing the crystal shot inside of them and causing them to shatter a few feet from where the targeting reticle designated. These weapons filled the air with splinters, allowing the gaps in the human armor to be exploited, but even then, it only slowed them down. "I got one!" Vastet screamed in victory, still dragging the helmeted head of a human along with her and holding it aloft. "Their neck is their weak point!" "Everyone's neck is a weak point!" Venderlin screamed, ducking down behind the gun shield of his splitter array as it was raked with machine gun fire. "We've only killed 6 of these bastards, and we've lost nearly 100 warriors already. What is going on? Are these veterans? Are they from the Daramir War?" A cast sender ducked low and ran up beside Venderlin, the 2 studs of his receiver headband glistening with the pearly blood of their own species. "Ships are coming down!" "Finally!" Venderlin screamed, pulling out a pair of smoke generators from his raiding vest. "Let's get off this rock before those humans get any closer to us."
Navy is reporting ships coming in through Atmo. They're catching the scans.
A radio man said, looking to Sergeant Mackey.
Top says to keep on the pressure. Frerin is about to start her assault.
Sergeant Mackey said, nodding to the radio man.
When we see them react to that fire, we'll push. I'm tired of being held up here by whatever that exploding crystal launcher is. Tell everyone around us to get ready. Copy.
The radio man said, then tapped a finger to his external helmet mount for his radio. Frerin was just coming around the bend in the street when she saw the alert ping from Sergeant Mackey and started pointing to the infantry around her.
You 6 go left and watch our entry. You 6 go right and watch our 6. Keep your spacing along the sidewalk. Everyone else, with me.
Frerin said, bringing her rifle optic to her eye as it fed her information as well. In all her life, she had never felt as at ease as she was now. In some ways, she felt invincible wearing this human assault armor, and quietly wondered to herself if this was how ancient human knights felt when they strode towards the lines of their enemies. Her troopers striding along beside her made her feel powerful as well, and it made her heart swell watching her fellow Yorpal work in such fine tune with the humans. She didn't have long to ponder much else as she made a wide pass along the middle of the street, and the enemy position opened up before her. Frerin held back the trigger without pause, tracing her reticle along bodies as her shoulder barely shook with the recoil of her rifle. Even as the Mandaranes screamed in their hissing language and returned fire, she didn't budge. She remembered when she would have ducked down or flinched away from the enemy fire coming at her, shattering the ground around her and throwing orange streaks through the air. But after a couple dozen or 2 range visits with Drill Sergeant Marshall, this was a piece of cake. Frerin could still taste the sand in her teeth after those range visits and ringing in her ears as Drill Sergeant Marshall fired around her head, and this seemed childish in comparison.
Cut in from the corner. Santana, keep watching our 6. Make sure these hissing pricks don't flank us.
Frerin said, then started walking forward, her rifle hammering away as 6 humans and 6 Yorpal formed up on her. Crystals sang as they ricocheted off of her armor or shattered, her legs taking the blows to her knees and thighs with ease. The Mandaranes seemed to be in a full-blown panic, finding no weak points in her armor. This was in part due to Frerin being able to easily track the damn orange crystals through the air and just close the gaps like she had been trained. The only reason one of her own had caught a crystal was out of a failure to close that gap in the first place. She still carried a small mote of hate for Staff Sergeant Krams, as he never failed to make her ribs rattle with that sniper rifle. As the Mandaranes turned to face this rear flank, everyone else pushed up, raining hell onto the cover that was the Mandaranes' only lifeline. There was a pause as 4 raiding cutters came down from the sky, raining orange crystals down from on high, and this seemed to give the Mandarines cheer, bolstering them. Rockets streaking up from the ground rained on their parade, as apparently the Mandarines were also unprepared for surface-to-air anti-ship heat warheads. The raiding cutters fell apart as if they were made of tinfoil, crumpling inwards and detonating with a rain of metal, fire, and even personnel. The detonations of the ships colliding with the ground or buildings rattled the ground under Freren's boots, though she was unbothered.
Sergeant Mackey, we are fixing bayonets. Watch your fire.
Freren called out, pulling out her nearly sword-length bayonet and clicking it onto place on her lug. All of her troopers followed suit, while the humans still had theirs in place.
Clear for charge,
Was all that Sergeant Mackey said in reply.
Charge!
Freren bellowed into her helmet, taking off at a sprint with her mustard-yellow tail fluttering behind her. The roar of her troopers filled her ears as they too took off at a run, and Freren cleared the broken concrete wall of a smoothie shop with ease, putting her shoed paws together and drop-kicking some pompous-looking tit into the shield of a large-looking gun. Freren was then thrown back onto her feet bodily by a human, hooking her under the armpit and lifting her skywards so she could keep up her offensive. The Mandarin slashed at her with his weird-looking sword, but all it did was leave a shallow groove along her breastplate and make her helmet flash with a heat warning. Before some mean-looking female could stop her, she lunged back with her rifle and buried her bayonet straight through the eye socket of the Mandarin, the blade ripping out of the back of his skull wetly with a spackle of pearly blood and brain matter. Oddly enough, their brains were also white, and Freren made note of that. Semantic backhanded her own Mandarin with her rifle butt before plunging her bayonet into his chest, while Terran simply beat his to death with his fist, the armor breaking apart the woman's face with wet cracks of buckling bone. Freren thought it odd that their armor was so weak, but then remembered that these point-looking peoples probably used the same kind of armor her own people did, along with odd hybrid polymers. As her squads bludgeoned, stabbed, and slashed their way through the rear of the Mandarin position, Sergeant Mackey and everyone else charged in from the front, sandwiching the couple hundred surviving Mandarins between 2 unyielding walls of infantry. True to the word of their first sergeant, no quarter was offered and no mercy was given. By the time Freren was done, she was breathing hard and her armor was spattered with thick rivers of pearly blood that shone in the morning light. She had taken a few more slashes and even a stab from an actual knife, but her armor was doing its job and pumping her with both painkillers and the little handy biorobots that patched up her skin. The worst part was the itching, as the robots used themselves to fuse wounds together, and it irritated her flesh something fierce. For her first combat, Freren did not lose a single trooper, and she sat on a low wall surrounded by dead Mandarins, taking off her helmet. Her fur stuck out at odd angles, her ears were going to need to be brushed, and her leg muscles were screaming at her. But she had never felt more alive and satisfied than this moment in her entire life. She looked around at her fellow Yorpals, and they seemed brighter in the eye, as if they had finally seen the light on how war was really done. The humans around her were fist-bumping both themselves, the Point, the Yorpals, and the Karlagan, as well as a few hugs being thrown around to the Jinn. After all, they were all still fresh recruits, and they had survived their first mission. As small details came to her through her exterior earpiece that she had plugged into place, she learned that there were some fatalities, though they were light compared to the hundreds of Mandarin that lay slain, the rest fleeing on their ships that had survived. Sergeant Mackey sat down next to Freren, then rustled her hair with a laugh, eliciting a yowl of annoyance from Freren. Hey, watch the fur, Sergeant. I'm going to have to brush it out enough now already as it is. Freren chided playfully, smacking the human's hand away. Sergeant Mackey smiled at Freren, his voice measured. Good work today. You got in some solid kills. The drones caught some of the footage. Drones? Freren said, suddenly a little nervous. She had stomped in the face of a female Mandarin after the woman had stabbed her with that knife, and she did not reckon it was going to look pretty if it was caught on footage. Snack? Sergeant Mackey said, holding out half of his candy bar. Gotta eat something nice after your first mission. Freren raised her eyebrow at the human, then shook her head, taking the offered half of the bicker bar. Of course, you humans would feel a need to eat at a time like this. You're alive, and only the living get to enjoy food, Sergeant Mackey said, kicking a long, cooled body of a mandarin. This poor fuck can't enjoy it anymore, so we better do it while we can. Farron pursed her lips as she looked down at the body, then shrugged as she took a bite of the bicker bar. Yeah, I suppose you have a point. Would prefer pizza, though. I'm sure we can get some pies going once we're back up on the ship, Corporal, Sergeant Mackey said, grinning evilly as he watched Farron give a gagging cough, the Yorpal accidentally inhaling wafer bar into her lungs.